think the intended audience really depends on the platform that's being used. Twitter is a public platform. They're tweeting in English. They're looking for an international audience.
This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. With the Taliban back in power in Afghanistan, there are a lot of questions around how legitimate their government really is. And just as the United Nations and other governments around the world are figuring out how to treat Taliban leadership, major social media platforms are grappling with some of the same questions.
There, part of the trickiness is, when do you define somebody as a world leader if they're not recognized by the international community? So there's a lot of different aspects that are really complicating this for the companies.
Since the Taliban claimed control of Afghanistan, the group has really tried to ramp up its efforts on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Currently, Facebook and YouTube ban the group and accounts affiliated with and/or supporting the Taliban. To justify that decision, Facebook has cited the US's inclusion of the group on its specially designated global terrorists list, as well as the company's own policy against dangerous organizations. Twitter has also banned the group, but cited a slightly different reason. Last week, the company explained it prohibits glorification of violence on its platform, and the Taliban is using that to their advantage.
Now they are being much more sophisticated in knowing where the lines are for community standards. They're being really careful to not hit that imminent harm threshold that many of these companies have.
That idea of imminent harm widely came up after the January 6th riots at the US Capitol.
When you saw, the decision to originally remove President Trump from the platform came after the Capitol was already overrun and there had already been violence that was happening.
For many social media sites, this current situation is a test of their policies that were put in place because of those riots, and a reason President Trump is still banned today. But even by using imminent harm to defend their decisions, banning Trump was met with significant backlash, arguing the move is essentially censorship. That is something social media networks want to avoid doing to Afghans if the Taliban does in fact end up being the official government of the country.
Where do you make that determination that you're willing to take some of these things down? And now, what does that mean in tension between giving the Afghan citizens information and access to understanding what's happening or not?
In March, when the Myanmar military planned a government coup, Facebook made the decision to ban the Myanmar military and bar military-owned businesses from advertising on the site. The thing is, in that situation, the decision was pretty clear because there was an obvious side which was anti-democratic.
This is also an ever-evolving space. The policies of what stays up, what comes down or gets labeled, this has been obviously a very extreme and robust discussion. I expect it to stay one for many years to come of where these lines should be.
The Taliban sort of gets this reputation of not being too tech savvy. That might be partially because they banned the internet back in the 1990s, but the truth is they've been using technology and social media sites to their advantage, finding ways around the current bans in place to get their messages out. Newsy's Tyler Adkison shows us how they're doing that and what image they're working hard to portray online.
The Taliban has been banned from networks like Facebook and YouTube, but over the years they have still found ways to refine their image and spread their messages on Western social media platforms. Experts told Newsy the group used this technology to build political momentum that aided in the takeover of Afghanistan, and continues to do so to try to calm the nation.
Part of what's driving the Taliban's social media push is rapid cell phone adoption in Afghanistan. According to the World Bank, only about 1 million Afghan citizens had access to a mobile device in 2005. In the decade after the US invasion, that peaked at nearly 24 million by 2017.
They have gotten more pragmatic and smarter in using these technological. On top of that, when Taliban were in Pakistan and have been in Pakistan, they have had tremendous support of campaign and propaganda from the state of Pakistan itself in terms of advice, technical advice, or theoretical advice on how to utilize media.
Experts following Taliban social media channels during the takeover told Newsy the group used platforms to establish a sense of normalcy for those still in the country, and framed the group as more progressive than previous versions of the Taliban. In some cases, the Taliban even used WhatsApp to set up emergency medical service and security hotlines for citizens.
The majority of sort of, I would say, like military or political content has been focused on security provision and reconciliation, showing, Hamid Karzai, Abdullah, lots of people who are involved with the former government, even local police chiefs, local provincial assistant governors, vice governors, being happy and safe.
The Taliban is also using social media, including Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, and WhatsApp, to control their public relations image on both domestic and international fronts.
I think the intended audience really depends on the platform that's being used. Twitter is a public platform. And that's how you reach out to a broader audience. That's how you reach out to audiences beyond your borders. They're tweeting in English, and so it's pretty clear that they're looking for an international audience.
As to whether the Taliban's messages trying to convince citizens they're a legitimate government, experts told Newsy they were skeptical about the current messaging.
They're trying very hard to look like, a softer, squishier Taliban than they were in the past. And I think it's going to be really important to see if that actually plays out. Most experts, and I'm going to agree with them, kind of doubt that that's the case. It's hard for a tiger to change their stripes.
Tyler Adkisson, Newsy, Chicago.
Here to talk with us a bit more about the Taliban and social media is Newsy's Tyler Adkisson. Tyler, the news cycle moves so quickly. It's hard to really keep track of a lot of things that happen online, one of which being the comparison between President Trump and the Taliban. What's being said there, and why is a former U.S. president being compared to the Taliban?
Well, I want to be honest with you. When I saw this comparison pop up at first, I was incredibly confused. I think that what this conversation about Trump not being allowed on these platforms while the Taliban is being allowed on there, I think that, if we're being honest, a lot of that kind of discussion about why does this inequity exist has come a lot from conservative influencers online who are trying to point out something that on surface level seems to make a lot of sense. Like, the former president of the United States is in the same position as a terrorist group that they both cannot exist on these platforms, whereas one still is and another one isn't. When Trump was removed from social media back in the winter of this year, he had been given several warnings about, do not try to stoke anything that might come close to violence on the platform. Facebook reached out to him personally and told him that. And despite that, he continued to say that the election was fraudulent and ended up crossing the threshold where he ended up breaking a rule that got him taken down from the platform. The Taliban has been a bit more, savvy about what they're posting online. They're trying to show people, getting along with the Taliban in the streets. They're showing former, local officials standing alongside the Taliban, smiling and, looking like they are in a comfortable situation.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting dynamic considering the Taliban, had back in the 1990s had banned internet, and now they're using this social media platform in I guess what we could call a pretty savvy way. I'm curious to know, what do we think will happen down the line? I mean, are we going to see the Taliban, get a blue check at some point, and they being recognized as like a legitimate government from social media platforms? Like, what do we see happening down the line here?
And I think that one thing that's important to look at here is that there is the fact that these social media companies are still trying to figure out how to deal with the existing accounts that the Taliban may have. But really, the bigger question here is what happens to the pages that are already in the hands of the Afghani government and those various ministries and whatnot. And if they end up with them, then they're going to be in a position in which they may have a check mark. But, there's so many, I think, what ifs in this situation that go beyond the social media companies. And some of it may be a bit of a deflection, but some of it is, important to keep in mind. For instance, I think that a lot of these companies are trying to get a sense of what the United States is going to say about this group. If the US recognizes this as being a new government, then social media companies are going to have a bit of a different kind of approach to how they see diplomacy than if the US government does it. And it's not just them, too. It's the international community as well. This is a global situation where, even though they're based in the US, they're going to be looking to nations all over the world to figure out, do we let this group actually stay up on the platform or not? Because here's the other thing. This is a bit of a double-edged sword in the fact that if you take these platforms down, inevitably, you are stopping information from getting out to Afghan citizens who may be looking to those platforms in order to be able to figure out what is going on right now. This is a decision that I don't think that any social media company wants to be the sole one making the decision, because there's going to be backlash no matter what you do here. I mean, we've seen this with the Trump and Taliban situation already. So I think really what the question is going to be here is what happens in that intersection between the US government, social media companies, and international communities when it comes to figuring out whether or not this is even going to be a government that will be recognized in the future.
Tyler Atkinson hitting the brakes on the Lightspeed news cycle to give us some context and understanding. As always, we appreciate you, man.
Thank you.
When you're back, we've still got our focus on Afghanistan and the effort to evacuate American citizens and Afghan allies.